Hello, everyone, and welcome. I think I'm supposed to just start us off. I got very strict instructions at 3 p.m. Let's go. So let's go, everybody. Welcome to this session of Global Skills Day. This is the Future of Learning track, and this is a session on platforms for learning at scale. My name is April. I will be your host, but I'm more excited to introduce you to our fabulous panelists today and get this session going. So our burning question for the next 50 minutes, and I'll be clear about that, we will end on time at 50 past the hour of whatever time zone you're in. Our burning question for the next 50 minutes is going to be, what are world-renowned entrepreneurs focusing on to help people to learn more rapidly and effectively, to develop new skills, and to enable a better future for human learning? So this is a rock star group of session participants. I am thrilled. I just kind of get to hold the space. And I was just joking before, it feels like a huge indulgence and gift to just get to chat with the people you're about to hear from. So please put your questions in the chat. I will be moderating that as we go along, and we will do our best to fit in as much conversation as well as questions as we can. So what we decided we're going to do, I'm just going to do a kind of lightning round of introductions plus one question for each of our panelists, our session participants, our contributors today. So I'm going to just go ahead and dive right in. And Esther, I'm going to start with you. So Esther Wojcicki is our first guest today. And as the co-founder of Tract.app, so check out Tract.app, T-R-A-C-T, which is the world's first peer-to-peer gamified learning platform, Esther is bringing her award-winning teaching philosophies to empower young learners to discover new interests and deepen existing passions while developing critical thinking skills. She is also the dean of HarmonyPlus.com, which is an online enrichment program based on her book, How to Raise Successful People. Esther, what a thrill to see you again today, to have you join us. Let me just kick it off with an easy question. That's a joke. The pandemic disrupted education in a way that no one could have predicted. It was time for an old, dysfunctional system to be disrupted. How should this system be reconstructed this fall when school starts? And what should we keep from our pandemic learning?
Great question. Thank you very much, April. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm really excited. This is kind of the $64,000 questions, like how should we reconstruct our schools? So of course I have my own ideas because it's based on what I did and what I was successful at doing. But I am sure that all the others, Josh, Devin, and Jared will probably be able to chime in on this as well. Sure, they have ideas. But let me just tell you what I am thinking and why I'm thinking the way I am. So school in the past really taught people primarily how to memorize, how to follow instructions and how to memorize. The people that got straight A averages were ones who for sure knew how to memorize and knew how to follow instructions. And the kids that did not follow instructions or refused to memorize stuff that they thought was nonsense, they did really poorly. And so if you take a look around at who are entrepreneurs today and who are making the biggest changes in the world today, you might want to ask yourself, which ones of those people, what were they straight A students? Were they top of the line? Were they people that memorized a lot and followed a lot of instructions? So I'll just ask you, ask yourself, take a look at that. And so the world today needs thinkers, needs people who can actually think outside the box. And is the school system trying to promote that kind of student? And I would say offhand, the answer is no. I know as a teacher for 40 years, it's much, much easier for me to make everybody do the same thing at the same time, turn it all in, and then I'm done with it. It's like, oh yeah, you have one assignment and either you did it right or you did it wrong. You get an A or an F or whatever, something in between. But I'll tell you that doesn't train the kind of people we need for the 21st century. So putting back the school system that has totally fallen apart. Now, how do we put it back? So my theory and my suggestion, and it'd be great to have other people tell me what you think, is to give kids more control in the classroom. It's not complex, but what's complex about it is it's very tough for teachers to think about putting students in control. Because the main thing that you get out of School of Education, when you get your teaching credential, you walk out the door with your teaching credential, and in the other hand is a book. And the book is how to maintain control of your class. And that is what everybody is evaluated on. Does the teacher control the class? If the answer is no, well, then you might as well look for another job. So I'm suggesting just 20% of the time where students are in control, just 20%. I don't want to disrupt the whole system because they'll all get upset. I don't want to upset everybody, but everybody knows that we need creativity. We definitely need critical thinkers. We need independent thinkers, and you don't get that in the regular pedagogy. So I developed this app called Tract.app, and the goal of Tract is to fit into the 20% time. And why did I do that? Well, I've tried for years to get teachers to give kids control, and they're like, I'm not kidding, 2 weeks out of a training session, I'd get an email like, yes, I know they need to have a few hours each week where they're in control. Can you send me the lesson plans for those 2 hours? I could tell right away they didn't understand it at all. And so that's what I'm trying to say. The school system needs to give kids control. When they put it back, you, the teacher, or the teachers can lecture a certain percentage of the time, but the rest of it, kids have to work on collaboration skills, communication skills, critical thinking skills, and creativity skills. And that does not come from lecture-based model. So I would love to hear what other people have to say. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak first. I'm honored.
Wow, Esther, this is fabulous. This is a big kickoff. And I think I'm already looking to everybody else and I'm like, oh my goodness, we could probably just stick on this one question and layer it for an hour. But I'm reminded a lot of John Taylor Gatto's A History of Undergrad Education. I'm reminded of how the best person to teach you something is somebody who's just learned how to do it, and how much agency and ability kids have, but we do a really good job of stamping that out. So we are going to dive into collective conversation at the end. So I want all of us to like hold on to this question because we're coming back to it. But I also want to make sure that everybody gets an introduction and we sort of cast a couple other nets, and then we'll come back and all dive in and involve the audience as well. So thank you for that wonderful kickoff, Esther. Now I'm going to switch next to Josh Goldberg, who is the co-founder of Legends of Learning. Thank you, Josh. Actually, that's a really good idea. Yeah, Esther, you and I have it easy. They sort of know we're undernumbered, but the rest of you wave when your name comes up. So,
I'm the bald white guy.
You don't have to worry about your hair every morning.
Yeah, I gotta say that's an advantage in the Zoom world for sure. So yeah. Josh is the co-founder of Legends of Learning, which is one of the largest game-based learning platforms for K through 12 students in the world. And one thing I just wanted to call out as well, if it wasn't obvious at the outset, each one of you has developed some kind of learning platform. The title is Learning Platforms at Scale, but the platform approach to what we're doing. So Josh also has a 6- and 8-year-old who regularly destroy him in all kinds of gaming experiences. Now, prior to co-founding Legends of Learning, Josh co-founded Astrum Solar, which was sold to Direct Energy and Sunlight Financial, and is now publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticket SUNL. So welcome, Josh.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thrilled. So let's zoom in a little bit from Esther's incredibly broad and helpful vision casting and talk a little bit more about learning platforms and these new ways of learning and engagement. So I gather we're kind of in the early stages, the Wild West, if you will, of the game-based learning market. And as such, how can learning platforms as an industry help parents and trainers and educators and other market constituents differentiate between games that purport to be educational and games with proven educational value? And I might even add, how do we make that distinction? Where do we draw that line? Is there a line to be drawn, and is it also kind of evolving? Yeah.
There's probably a line, but it might not be a straight one. So I think that maybe following Esther's point, like I think one of the big changes we're seeing is treating kids as consumers of their own education as opposed to recipients. And that basically means like in the consumer world, you give someone something that they actually want to do, and then they go ahead and do it, as opposed to a lot of education traditionally has been, hey, you're going to do this because I'm telling you to memorize it, or I'm putting it on the board. And I think, we've seen this explosion of amazing resources. I'm a huge fan of Devin's company, Classcraft, really cool things as well. But there's this huge explosion of resources out there, from game-based learning to, Zoom coding and tutoring for your kids. All these different things are out there now that didn't exist in many cases 18 months ago. And just as a parent, my son's actually upstairs doing a coding class right now, and there's a million coding classes. And so how do I know? Of course, they all purport to be amazing, because why wouldn't you purport to be amazing if you're a new coding company? But how do you actually figure out what's good and what's not? Because not everything's good. And so it's just something that I just wrestle with a lot. And we see it in the game-based learning space is, we build educational games that are backed by published research and rigor. And other people build games, and I look at them and I'm like, that's a fun game, but there's no educational value at all. But, as a parent or as a teacher, how do you have the time to figure this out? Where would you even go to figure it out? And so I think the Wild West point was a great one. There's all this great stuff, which is really, really good in theory. But how do you sift through it? How do you know what's actually going to work? How do you know if it's just a fun game or if it's a fun and an educational game? How do you do it as a teacher? How do you do it as a parent? And I don't really know how we build these standards, but I think as an industry in general, like we need to figure out a way to kind of like police ourselves, because, if we're all building companies to last, they have to, at least in the game-based learning world, the games have to be fun, but they have to actually add educational value. Like I'm always thinking, like, if we just make fun games, we're never going to be as fun as Fortnite and Roblox. So what are we doing, right? There has to be educational value too. And it's just something that I wrestle with, and I don't know how to solve it, because it's not black and white. And it might vary depending upon exactly what your content is, but I think it's going to be a big problem, because there's going to be games that come out that purport to be educational, that get into schools, and a superintendent's going to walk in and be like, what the heck are these kids doing? And you could have a backlash. And so I think it kind of behooves us to kind of police ourselves, and as an industry make sure that we kind of say, hey, they're a competitor of mine, but their stuff's also pretty good. And like, those guys over there, like they make fun games, but there's no educational value. And how do we identify those? Maybe it's like a ratings board of some sort. I don't know the answer, but I think it's going to be really important, because there's a lot of stuff being built, and we have to differentiate for our consumers. So it's a long-winded way. I don't know, but it's an important.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering, and I think shortly when Devin and Charrette are introduced as well, we can all kind of pile in with our answers and our ideas and circle back on any of these questions, because I have a funny feeling everybody on this in this session would have something to add there. I'm really interested, I think too, as I think about just technology or innovation, right? We assume that innovation is a good word, or innovation is a good thing. Innovation simply means something new. Innovation can be great. Innovation can be really dangerous. We assume that technology, it all depends on the intention of the creator and the user. And so that sense of if this whole notion of consuming, so are you a recipient? Are you a consumer? I would also argue, and this is a separate conversation, but the word consumer always rubs me kind of the wrong way, in terms of like, if we just consume, what if you're a proactive change agent where you're actually able to create a lot of the content, et cetera, like, which is what all of you are doing in some way. But I think there's just a whole lot we can circle back into here and chew on. So
a lot of it's about balance. Like I'm fine with my son playing Fortnite as long, but that's for fun. But when he does educational things, it's like a different pocket of his time. And so I just need to know where things fit, I think.
Yeah. Well, your comments and perspective are actually a perfect segue, I think, to Devin. So Devin Young is the co-founder and president of Classcraft. So Classcraft.com, which is a platform that gamifies behavioral management, social emotional learning, and student motivation in K through 12. So Classcraft creates a game-like learning experience for students in all their classes throughout the whole school year, while providing educators powerful new data to better understand how students are doing in real time. So Classcraft has scaled to over 8 million users in 165 countries and 11 languages. Wow. So Devin, welcome. Getting a little bit more granular here, but I think building on what we've been touching upon already, when it comes to scaling this platform, Classcraft, and some of what Jared was just saying as well, what do you think has been the secret to scaling Classcraft to the level that you have? And what were some of the important lessons, again, for better or for worse, that you learned along the way?
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks to Josh for the kind words. That was very nice of you. Yeah, I think it's been a bit of a journey. I think that all of us are trying to look at education in a new way and kind of breaking some conventions. And I think that one of the things that's been top of mind for us is just how do we learn as an organization. And I think that through that sort of scaling journey, we went through a lot of different phases. So we initially started off kind of being more B2C or B to teacher. So we had a website, people could sign up, they could put their credit card in and get a premium account. And that was sort of the first 4 or 5 years of the business was sort of focused on that scale, if you will, trying to get the classroom right. So we really spent a lot of time thinking about how teachers were using it with their students and making sure that it connected well. My other co-founder is my brother, oddly enough, and my dad. So we're a little bit of a mom and pop startup, but I assure you it's not the 3 of us. There's about 45 people on staff, but he taught for 3 years, and this actually came out of his classroom. So it was sort of like a slow baked sort of thing where he was testing out, what was working in his own with his own students. And so I think that a lot of that has been really material in terms of just kind of getting market fit and getting it to sort of connect in the right way. And then ultimately, to Josh's point, like see impact, right? So if there's impact, then you kind of get to progress. And if there isn't, eventually, you can market it as best you can or whatever, but you'll probably run out of funds and the company will fold at some point. And so, when we were at that phase, some of the things that really were helpful was that we built an audience and a community sort of around the product. So we had ambassadors and we were kind of in dialogue with folks. We leaned really heavily on Facebook lookalike audiences. So we found people that, signed up on their own and then kind of asked Facebook to serve ads to people that look like them. And so you would get a lot of people that like, oh my God, I found my people in this community. How did that happen? And we're like, well, it's not that magical, actually. We kind of matched you guys up in a way. And then eventually the product sort of scaled to, we were getting inbound from schools and it was kind of time to start thinking about districts and really kind of bringing the vision and the mission of the company to start looking at systemic change around engagement, motivation, and sort of the whole human element of the learning experience. And so that's a process we're still in, to be quite frank. I think that we're 2 years in, we had to change a lot of the product and sort of build a lot of things like, really robust rostering and much better onboarding for teachers that were less accustomed to these kinds of practices, better analytics, and just more ability to manage behavior like down to the individual student and customize to that student what their experience within the Classcraft sort of universe was. And then also just from like the marketing side, so a lot more sort of thought leadership, and then things that seem a little counterintuitive, but like teachers are like gung-ho games and let's do like, connect with my students and all this kind of stuff. And then generally after interviewing a bunch of administrators, they're like, yeah, games not so much. Like, let's stick this in, one school and test it out for a year. And if it works, we'll scale it up to a couple more. And that's actually really hard to scale that way, right? Because you're like then kind of in this pilot sort of scenario. And so I think a lot of the conversations we've been having internally are shifting to like, how do we become behavior experts? How do we talk about impact? How do we talk about just really connecting this to things that they care about and translating a lot of the work? And so I think that, been involved in the game-based learning community for an incredibly long time. In ed tech years or whatever, we're getting to about 8 years. We've seen a lot of companies come and go, unfortunately. And I think that a lot of this is about sort of changing the mindset around, how to do this well. And there be good examples of folks that have actually been able to make this effective for real. And so yeah, still kind of on that journey, but that's a lot of the things we've kind of come across along the way.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And again, I'm excited. I just kind of want to sit back and listen to the four of you riff on one another's ideas and your questions. And there's some great questions in the chat now. And thank you. It's interesting, the whole just the EdTech space, and that there was so much growth and, some success and a lot of failures. And then 2020 happened, and the fact that it both saw an explosion, but also to some degree, there's now this weeding out of, okay, we're capable of a lot more. We've learned what works and what doesn't to some degree. But now how do we move forward responsibly? Which I think that whole notion of what responsible looks like touches upon, in a way, all three of your questions so far. So let's bring in the last member of this posse today, Jared Chung, who is the Executive Director of CareerVillage, which is careervillage.org. And that is a technology nonprofit organization that helps underrepresented youth prepare for careers. So this is the shift from the learning or the school phase per se into the workforce, the world, and so forth. So CareerVillage has served over 5 million learners using a crowdsourced model that allows youth to get personalized career advice from 90,000 volunteers on any given day of the year at any given time. So Jared, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so kind of like Devin, CareerVillage seems to have scaled significantly. Can you tell us about how your scale came about? And again, the pros, cons, the learning lessons for better, for worse, along the way.
We haven't yet tried Facebook lookalike audiences, but that's definitely top of the list now after Devin's comment on it. So I guess to give a little bit of a sense of the scale, 5 million online learners that we've served. They're spread across 190 countries, and the crowdsourcing model requires two sides. So the 5 million is the learner side. The other side are individual citizens who are volunteers that are answering questions. There's just still under 100,000 of them right now. They're in all kinds of occupations. They're all over the place. So our challenge has been making sure that we're scaling both sides in balance. For the most part, we've been able to reach youth basically through two channels. One channel is making all of the career content, all the learning content, openly accessible. That's enabled it to get indexed in Google, show up when students, as they do, ask Siri their career questions or go to Google to try to get the answers to their curiosities about career. That's bringing them into CareerVillage, and then we're showing them that this community could be there for them. The other channel we're going through are educators. So K-12, we're district-wide implementations. We work with workforce boards. We started working with higher ed as well. Nonprofits are rolling out the CareerVillage program within their programming. And we've had to be very intentional about packaging up what we can offer as an online community-based model, but packaging that up with curriculum in a way that an individual educator can easily integrate into a classroom or integrate into an after-school program. So that's taken a lot of work. And on the volunteer side, we've had to bring in volunteers through partners like employers or local volunteer management organizations. Or frankly, just a huge number of volunteers have come in on their own. I think 2/3 of them have come in while they're actively looking for volunteer programs to do at home. There isn't a huge amount you can do to volunteer at home. And so CareerVillage is one of the easier options for that.
Fabulous. Wow. This is terrific. And I'm wondering which direction we kind of want to go at this point. I think, and thank you all for the questions in the chat. We're gonna circle back and sort of mull on a few of them. But a meta question, so to speak, that came up in our prior discussions that I think touches upon a lot of what's come up already is how what you're offering supplements, complements, differs from, enhances the work of teachers. And so thinking about the human to human education model, what kinds of K through 12 education is most compatible with your offerings? Also, given particularly the globe where there's global scope or even, national scope, but lots of differences even within the US. But, here at Global Skills Day, we have 125 countries. No, well, 125 speakers, many dozens of countries represented from around the world. So I'm curious whether there are countries or regions that you've found are especially open to your offerings as part of the learning mix. And maybe this does actually relate a little bit, Devin, to what you were saying about people saying, "Oh, I found my tribe," but how does that play out? Does any of you want to comment on that? And I should also say too, if there's anything that's burning top of your mind based on what's been shared by the other panelists, please feel free, open mic, to chime in and comment on that as well.
Yeah, I do have a perspective on that first piece of that. I think that one of our primary focuses is trying to bring more career-related content into the classroom. Frankly, we do that pretty early. I mean, we've got a lot of elementary school students who are doing career-related preparation. Obviously, high school or post-secondary is where most of our community is, but I think that there's a huge opportunity to tie what you want to do after your education more closely into what you're doing in class. I think it goes to agency, which is a common theme here. I mean, Esther's talking about agency. April, you brought up agency. And I think, we talk to high school dropouts who say, look, if you taught me how to make money in school, I get straight A's, right? And so I think there's a sense that there's a disconnect that we really need to close. So we love to see teachers bringing career into math class or into history or into any other subject matter. It doesn't just have to live in, if you have it, your designated space for career. I think what we try to recognize is that we need to bring the cavalry, which is we need to bring all the folks who are in industry who can, come in and help out with the industry specific questions. I think that's why we've kind of structured it. That's why we found success in structuring it around as a Q&A. But I do think that we need to have everything really deeply integrated into supporting the existing work of teachers.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jared made a point that just resonated with me. One of the reasons why I started Legends of Learning, when I was 10, I got a computer game called Civilization. I don't know, I'm sure people on this have played it.
We played all the same games. I was like a Magic the Gathering guy. I also played Civ. It was the same games.
Are we finding our tribe here, guys?
I know. This panel was put together with a Facebook lookalike audience, I think.
And I got this game, and I didn't leave my room for 4 days, and my parents were nagging me to shower, and I was like, "Leave me alone! I'm playing this game." And it's a world-based game where you basically build empires. And you're building the Roman Empire, or the Babylonians, or whatever the empire is over time. And I developed a passion for history playing this game, and I wanted to read more books about the Romans. And my mom was like, "Why do you want to go buy a book about Alexander the Great?" I'm like, "Because I played this video game," right? And so I think we can make school fun for kids in a way that they're used to experiencing, or make careers more fun and accessible, whatever that is. And I think we can be a great gateway to get people excited about something relevant, and we can help teachers do that as well. And so that's kind of a big passion for me. Let's get kids excited about math or becoming a firefighter or whatever it is. Let's give them a passion. And if you have a passion for something, you'll be very good at it. And we can help teachers do that. And so I think a lot of our businesses are about making it easy for teachers to use this in the classroom, because teachers are especially overwhelmed and busy. And so it has to be great for the kids, has to meet their needs, but also has to be easy for teachers and school districts to actually go ahead and deploy in the classroom.
Yeah.
If I can chime in, and Esther, I'm just thinking about you having spent time. I mean, you're in a really just a unique position, certainly for this gathering, but more broadly, having spent so long as a teacher, and then seeing it kind of the inside, outside, and over generations. What is your sense of that teacher dynamic, that teacher, the enhancing, the complementing, what is the best case outcome look like that, that's sort of within reach as well?
Well, I think that the best case outcome would be really to, for example, let kids involve themselves in Legends. Is it Legends of learning or for
Yeah.
learning.
Of learning.
Of learning, I think that would be great. Also, let them involve themselves in Classcraft. You know, let them do some of these things in class, and as well as the CareerVillage, as opposed to just sitting there listening to the teacher talk. Initiative of on their own. I don't care what the initiative is. And I mean, I'm really excited to hear that Josh learned about history through a game. That's pretty impressive. So you never know the outcome of some of these games that kids play. And I would let them do more of that in class, as opposed to this memorization and sitting there all the time and listening to the teacher talk. And it should be built into the programs of schools. And I think that would also enhance all the ed tech companies, because it would give kids an opportunity to try all kinds of things, and then they can share with each other. By the way, did you know I tried this game the other day and it was great, and or whatever. I just think that that makes a big difference. You know, I taught for much longer than most teachers teach. You know, the average teacher drops out after 5 years. Isn't that sad? 5 years. Anyway, I was there for 40 years. And the
Wow.
reason I did it is because I love being with kids. You know, my daughter's always made this joke, Mom, you know, something happened to your personality. It was arrested as a teenager. I was like, yeah, that's probably true. But, you know, I always have a really good time. But part of my good time is giving them an opportunity to share what they like and what they want to do. And I mean, can you imagine if all these kids went on CareerVillage and then shared the information that they got with the other kids? God, that would be incredible. They would learn so much more doing that than they would sitting there listening to me lecture about anything. And the same with, you know, Classcraft. I actually got a demonstration of Classcraft at one point. I was really impressed.
Oh,
So
good.
yeah, it was pretty impressive.
Just
So that's what I'm talking about. Agency, give kids an opportunity to try these things. I mean, all of the three of you all have these great companies. Why doesn't the school allow access to that in class? That's what I'd like to ask.
Just to support, Esther, what you're talking about, the critical role of sort of the peer-to-peer connection. One of the most important things for students when they are on CareerVillage, this world where they have like this website where they have all this career advice, all the answers to all these people from all these amazing backgrounds, of all their advice is up there. But the first thing they love doing is reading the questions from the other students. It's actually the questions from the other kids that's actually the first hook. And I think that's a really great example of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. You know, there's no one more powerful in the kid's life than another kid just a little bit older. Really, just a little bit older.
The near peer.
Yes, the near peer, which is part of what I'm doing in Tract, is I have the near peers creating learning paths for the preteens, basically. And, you know, the goal is, can you create something really interesting for kids a little bit younger? And kind of shocking, some of the stuff that they're coming up with. I can just tell you, I never would have assigned it.
I have a question for the gaming experts here, because we have two. Esther, I'm not sure if you consider yourself. I hope I didn't just. I hope you didn't consider yourself a gaming expert, and I just said you were.
I'll be the newbie. It's okay. It's okay. I'm the neophyte. I know nothing.
Devin is the closest to gaming
for a long time, we've you know, folks have said, hey, you know, you should take your educational application and you should like gamify it. And people come along, they're like, gamify all the things, right? And we've always been a little bit like, okay, there's a lot of complexity to gaming dynamics and there's expertise there, and you know, we could bring some stuff in, but we've been a little bit cautious and not really sure exactly when the game is critical to the learning, when it gets in the way of the learning, you know, or if there's any other dynamics around gaming. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on, you know, how do you approach the question of when and whether a game is additive or subtractive to a learning experience?
Can I do something? I'm not sure, April, I can, but can I share my screen? Is that like something that's
Yeah, you should be
illegal,
able to.
or I think it's disabled. Okay, never mind.
I'm wondering if I can grant. I don't have hosting. I think we'd have to consult the GSD gods. I don't
Devin, the
have.
authorities have been dispatched to your house.
All right.
No worries. Anyways, there's I'll answer just with some visuals, but we one of our advisors is the creative director of Assassin's Creed, or was. So it's like a really big, very successful video game. And we've talked a lot. We did our own little kind of mini summit this fall, I guess, yeah, around student engagement and looking at how basically what happened with the pandemic in the last year is that school became part of the attention economy. Yeah. And that's sort of the way that we frame anything you spend your attention on. And so when you're Netflix, you're actually more concerned about Fortnite than you are about HBO, because that's where most people are spending their time. And so when you've got a computer open, you can open a tab and then go to Netflix. Your school is competing with Netflix now, right? And so how do we actually move towards something that that's more on an equal playing field, because video games have been at this attention economy thing for a very long time, right? They do research, they figure out kind of how to get people the most emotionally invested and all that kind of stuff. And what's really, really crazy is that actually a lot of the mechanics within that drive engagement are core to the school experience. So they really look at three sort of, competencies. So I was going to show you a beautiful triangle. At the top of the triangle, there's this idea of competency. So how good you are at something, right? Tetris uses just that. It's a super simple game. You keep playing, but the more you do it, the more you want to see if you can beat your score. Math, multiplication, competency, same idea. Like, how good am I? And if I'm good at math, then I feel good, and then I want to do more of it. Then there's another axis, which is autonomy, right? And so autonomy is really like Minecraft is not a game. It's just a place where you can make stuff and you can be God, basically. So you have all this autonomy. And when you're a student, right, like to Esther's point, you have limited autonomy. So it's not really fun. And then, the more that you have that, it's empowering and it's really awesome. And then the third part of that triangle is social relations, basically. So how connected are you to students or peers? And social media, like the entire thing, is just super hard on that, right? Like, it's so powerful in terms of social connections that like it becomes a really strong player when it comes to attention. And so I think it's interesting to sort of use those things a little bit as kind of a lens to look through game design, because basically Classcraft does gamification. Like at the core of it, we're gamifying the school year. It's gamification. What is powerful in it is the art of that. How do you get it to like be balanced properly and create enough dependency between students so that, to Esther's point, like you have teachers that are running a classroom and the students are accountable to that teacher. That's going to set up a certain kind of dynamic that's going to have all its own tensions and limitations. And really what we're doing with Classcraft is we're putting students in teams for the year where what they do impacts positively or negatively their peers. So it's simple, but actually what it does is it totally rewires the social dynamics in a classroom where students are accountable to one another. And so by reframing something and incentivizing something like asking for help is an uncomfortable thing, right? But if it's in my team and we're incentivizing that behavior, it becomes, who am I going to allow to give me help so that they get points? So you're on the inbound of getting help from a bunch of people, and all of a sudden outcomes start going through the roof, and it's about tweaking the social relationship between folks. And so I think that there's a lot of books that go into this. There's a lot of, like, it's like anything. You get like, you're asking Jared, what, should I stick a leaderboard on and some badges, right? That's what we hear everywhere. And it's like, it didn't really work. And you're like, this is a bunch of BS and broccoli basically and chocolate. And it's the same thing as playing music, right? Like I can learn 2-3 chords and like strum, Old MacDonald, or I can learn the scales. And I can understand which key it's in, and I can start actually playing with other people and having a connection with other people. And sorry, I play music, so that's my analogy. But I think that there's a there in terms of the artistry and all that kind of stuff. And I would imagine even Josh, through the amount of games that you guys have made, you're starting to understand like where the sweet spot is, where you're, what's worth putting energy and what's not, and what's going to have sort of impact from the player's perspective, and then ultimately how's that the delivery mechanism for the content you're trying to get through. So I know that's a bit of a complicated, but maybe just to recap, like there really is like competency, autonomy, and social connections. And if you can push those and use certain game elements to try to like cover as much ground between those three axes, you're going to find stronger engagement and the results that you're looking for when creating an experience that I think all the platforms are doing.
Yeah, I mean, just like I think it just has to be intentional. I mean, that's the big thing. It just has to be intentional, not just like, oh, you get some points because you deposited a check in your bank account. Like I was going to deposit the check anyway. Like,
Yeah. It's extrinsic motivation, right? When it's just like I'm rewarding you and paying you for stuff, it doesn't work. Over time, like there's a ton of research that just shows it drops. If you build intrinsic motivation, which is what Fortnite and all these good games do, then you have sustaining engagement and you get the outcomes you want.
Yep.
Sorry, Esther, you had a point earlier. I didn't want to cut you
So
off.
I just think that what you just said is really important, intrinsic motivation, and that's what you want to have in everything. And
100%.
you start with extrinsic motivation and you want to gradually move it away and then get intrinsic motivation. And some of the things that I was doing, it wasn't a game, but I gamified it. Basically, I'm producing a lot of publications, newspapers, magazines, television. And the reason that kids liked it is because it was something they cared about, where they were working on with other kids. So it was relationships, and it was their name that was going to be on it. And there was incredible intrinsic motivation. And so, I mean, my biggest problem with those students in that program, there's about 700 of them, was I could not get them to leave the school. It was fighting all the time.
That's so awesome.
Right, but it was because who's at the school? All their friends, right? And that's what was going on. So, if we can do more of that, that's why I say, if kids can work together in groups, I don't care what they're working on, because school and education, it's all about relationships. And if you keep them all separate in rows and don't let them talk to each other, then how do they build relationships? They don't. And so
especially after the last year, I think that's even more important than ever. And if I can just add one last little point on this to put a bow and bring it full circle, Classcraft ran into this issue. We were like really focused on developing intrinsic motivation, but then it was complicated to get there because you actually need to do a handful of different things to kind of get the sweet spot. And then when you roll out a district of 50,000 students, it's too complicated. Like the teachers are like, hold on, I can't, like, this is way out of my league. So then what do you do with that? And so we spent the last year doing research in classrooms, creating prototypes, and we rebuilt Classcraft. It's launching next week. We've been at this for a year. And the whole thing is about moving someone from extrinsic, super simple, I'm rewarding you, over time to intrinsic, right? And to sort of handhold them, and they'll move at the pace they need to get there, but we're going to meet you where you are, and then we're going to take you where you need to be to see transformational change.
Fantastic. I'm excited about your launch.
Like, not everything has to be games. I mean, like, Jared, it may be that your platform provides such an amazing experience for kids who are just talking to successful, engaging professionals, that it already is fun and engaging and serves its purpose. Like, I think people are like, oh, let's gamify everything. Let's make everything about game-based learning. And I think there's value to that, but there's some things that are just so naturally engaging on their own that they don't need to be made more fun. And the medium could be a story or a great book or a movie, and not everything needs to be a game.
And if I can pick up, actually, I have two questions that kind of go in two different directions, but actually one of them for you, Jared. Well, one of them actually came from Hugh, who's in the session, and earlier he had asked this question that actually Devin speaks exactly to what you were talking about, that basically says, let me find it again. So Hugh asks, so I'm gonna ask two questions, and I think we can probably get to both of them, and then we're gonna need to wrap up. We have 6 minutes left. I am committed to ending on time. But the question from Hugh, which I think segues, Devin, to what you were saying, is it, building on this, is it possible to raise social and emotional intelligence through the wire? So we're talking about social connection, and that makes a lot of sense, but this notion of what we learn and how we develop these kinds of EQ, DQ, AQ, whatever you want to call it, in person, but then how that translates to the online world. And then very separate, but Jared, as we were just thinking about this transition from what we're doing in school with learning and then into the world, and blending, sort of integrating these things, just what is your, well, in your opinion, I should say, what is the most important misconception that we have about youth career development? I think you've already both of you have already gone a little bit these directions. I'd be curious to tease those out a little bit more. And Esther and Josh, obviously, well, we'll do a rapid fire round at the end and call it.
Yeah, well, we should ask about the youth career development. I think that's pretty important right now.
All
Well,
right.
I think that, so rapid,
Yeah,
so
Jared.
the rapid fire round. So super fast, I'd say biggest misconceptions. I mean, two of them. Number one, that it all has to be solved by teachers and counselors on their own. I think that's not right. I think there's a role for a lot of other people to help too. And somehow we don't have to put everything on their shoulders. So that's number one. And number two, I say is that that you can't measure career readiness. It turns out not to be right. We just tend not to do it in this country. And then just segueing a little bit to the other topic to help, move into that one. I think through the wire, a really interesting phrase. I have so many questions about through the wire. But what I would say is we spend a lot of, students are like extremely adept at understanding social dynamics that are occurring through text message or through short form video or like on the internet, right? They like totally get what's going on interpersonally through online mediums. We spend a lot of time working with them on that. For example, trying to get students to feel really comfortable saying thank you after they get help. That's something that happens in real life. We work on it online too.
Yeah, and I think one thing with games is like you'll see kids, and Devin, you might say this, who aren't friends or really aren't from the same social circles, but they get into a game together. All of a sudden they're playing and helping each other, kind of like sports in that regard. Like you're on a sports team and you work with people that you aren't friends with, but you have a common goal. So I think, games or fun videos, whatever it be, through the wire can be a great connector for kids, especially during COVID. Definitely not a replacement for in-person socialization, but can be a very useful tool as well.
We spend a lot of time trying to figure this stuff out at multiple levels. We have a thing called quests. It takes lesson plans and turns them into adventures. We created a whole arc of 23 quests that are all related to the CASTLE framework for SEL competencies. And so each story models, say, respect, like a core competency, and then there's curriculum to match. So, and it's adapted to grades and that kind of stuff. And so we figured out a way to model it through different experiences, and then Classcraft itself takes those same competencies and you can load them in so that teachers can identify when they're happening in real time in the classroom. And so I think that I agree it's not in person, but Zoom and trying to work through different exercises and that kind of stuff. Picking up on your body language now. You're nodding. I get it. I shut up if you look bored. Like it, that stuff is still kind of happening. So I think. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's perfect. I think, it's nothing like giving someone a hug when you haven't seen them in a year and a half. I can tell you that much. So like, but there's definitely some progress to be made, I think, if it is just digital.
Is there anything?
I just wanted to add one other thing here, that I made traditional class into a game. And I think, I didn't have to get a game to do it. So the Zoom calls, everybody hated the Zoom calls. Guess what? Kids don't hate the Zoom calls if they're in charge of the Zoom calls. And so all you do is have groups of kids in charge of the Zoom calls. They all show up, they all participate, and they all learn a lot. So I think it's again a control issue. The teacher wants total control, and you can't have total control if you're passing it all off to the kids. So that's just a thought for people to think about. Let kids learn to lead the Zoom calls. It's a great skill, by the way.
Yeah, this is great. Well, and just that the blending of the in-person and the online, and the fact that fundamentally it's agency, it's control, but that sense of ownership of the quest. And then Devin, I love the competency, autonomy, social connections. I'm sorry you couldn't show that triangle, but I wrote it down. So
it's a good one.
Awesome. On that note, we have 1 minute left. So I am going to say, from my end, I'm happy to wrap this up, but I actually want to just say, is there anything else in our final minute? I will sort of just open the floor to any of you for final last quick thoughts.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate. It's been great to learn about all of the other panelists' work.
Absolutely. This was a real blast, and it's all about helping the kids out. So
keep doing the work. It's important work. It's hard, but it's important.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great. And it was really great to be on this panel with all of you. I'm very impressed with what you're doing.
Awesome. And I'm honored to have just been able to come along for the ride. So with that, we are going to wish everybody a fantastic rest of your Global Skills Day. And I think the next set of sessions start at the top of the hour.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, April.
Bye.
Good job, April.
Thank you, April.
Bye.